Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my joy and delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. Whether you're joining us here in person or online, we're so glad that you are with us. And it is our honor today to welcome Esther Dyson. It's kind of hard to describe your career in any short period of time. You started off as a journalist. You were a pioneer and leader in the world of the internet and technology. You're a philanthropist, investor. You've served on boards. You've trained as an astronaut. You've done pretty much everything. You're here this morning to talk about Wellville, which is the 10-year nonprofit project you founded to help 5 U.S. communities in their quest to achieve equitable well-being. Thank you so much, Esther, for being with us today.
Thank you, and just forgive me, I also wear contact lenses, and I'm seeing...
the bright light.
No, it's something, just, you can turn off... Just,
we'll give Esther a second.
Yeah, one moment. This is my sanitation routine. Great, thank you.
You good?
Good morning, yes.
It's great to have you here. So we'll open it up to questions in a few minutes, but I think you were going to start by telling us a little bit about what Wellville is and what led you to start this project.
So Wellville, it's a 10-year nonprofit project, and all of those things are important. Most things like this, they last a year or two, and it's sort of just at the time you get ready and people start to trust you, the funding's gone, and oh, it worked, so we'll go do something else, as opposed to, wow, it worked, let's keep doing this. And second, it's nonprofit. There's no business model for this. The actual business model is that the government pays more for schooling, education, maternal care. There's a big role for churches and philanthropy as well, but for the fundamental investment in human capital, we really need the government to step up more effectively. And then finally, it's a project. Our goal is not for Wellville to live on. Our goal, and we'll talk about this, about the long term later. The long term is not about 10 years is your goal. 10 years is when something changes, you hand it off to other people. But I'm not a believer in earthly immortality. I'm a believer in do what you are while you're on earth, but hand something over to other people. So that's very vague. We work in 5 communities around the U.S. They are Spartanburg. If anybody online or here hails from there, let us know. Let me just move this slightly. Spartanburg, South Carolina, North Hartford, Connecticut, Muskegon, Michigan, Clatsop County, Oregon, and Lake County, California. They're all under 200,000 people. The total number is about 500,000. So we're going for density, because that's what a community is. It's not, it's not a thin layer. It's people who know one another in a community. If you're not there, you're missed. It's not an audience. And that's why I'm glad we're having Q&A. And what we're doing is we're not giving them fish. We're not teaching them to fish. We're helping them to build their own fishing schools that, again, will last beyond the 10 years.
What led you to want to do this, and how did you select these 5 communities out of so many communities you could have picked?
So first of all, my parents are scientists. Second, I was a fact checker reporter. So I believe in asking questions, and there are not stupid questions unless you keep asking them again and again and get the same answer. And you need to keep asking why. So then for 25 years I did tech, and that was great, but by the end, by 2005, 2007, it was just, what is the point of all this? And I thought healthcare is an area that really needs more efficiency and so forth and so on. And then if you look at healthcare, you have to ask, why are we spending so much time and effort doing bad repair jobs on people who shouldn't have been damaged. And around the same time, I was supposed to be on the judging panel for the X Prize for healthcare. I thought, what about an X Prize for health? So I was going to give a talk saying somebody should do an X Prize contest for health, and realized that's a really terrible talk. I come here to announce somebody else should do something. So I realized it was up to me and then a team, and that's how it started. And then your final question. So it wasn't, a nice white lady is here with some technology to help you. It was, there's this, we hope it's a contest, but there's no prize right now. We're looking for 5 small communities with a nonprofit cooperative of some kind that would like some outside advice and counseling, not money, just whatever. And to our amazement, by this time it was me and our CEO, Rick Brush, 42 communities from around the U.S. applied. And that wasn't just like a letter saying we're interested. It was a whole lot of data and what they'd done and so forth and so on. So we read through all those, picked 10 of them to visit in the summer of 2014, which was one of my best educational experiences. And then, of course, the next 7 years have been another one. But anyway, we picked 5 of those, and that's how we picked them.
And the goal that you're working towards, you won't achieve, but is equitable well-being. Can you talk about what that means, and how is that different from, say, healthcare?
Yeah. Well, healthcare is, again, it's a repair job, and you need to treat people who are sick, obviously. But if you look at so many kids, they grow up in dysfunctional families, in dysfunctional neighborhoods, and by the time they're 7 or 8, they're already damaged. They're too distracted to learn in school. Like 30+% of the kids in Spartanburg were obese in 3rd grade. And so we don't want to turn everybody into Einstein or Bill Gates or, Oprah Winfrey. We want each kid to be the best it can be and wants to be. So that's sort of the well-being part, and it's for all kids, not just the ones that were lucky. And it requires thinking long-term. It requires having, we'll go into this, but it requires having purpose and having goals that help you not do things that you regret the next day. Whether it's staying up too late or eating the wrong things or getting into a fight with somebody. How do you have that sense of the past and the future and a sense of agency?
What does this project look like on the ground? What does interacting with these communities consist of? You're bringing in kind of outside advisors, help. Who are these folks, and what are they working towards? So
we're very small. We're a team of 6/7 right now. 5 of us work, 1 in each of the communities. And we started out smaller, and but then at some point, it really makes more sense for each of us to do one of the communities. So I do Muskegon in Michigan, and we are outsiders. We don't pretend to be from inside, which means we're not really engaged in the politics. We don't want anybody's job. And at the same time, we're not handing out money. So people are not nice to us because, there's a real power imbalance. And that's a big problem with philanthropy in general. And I like to call it present without leave. We have no contracts with the communities. We have contracts with our people. They're formally consultants of New Venture Fund, which is one of these fiscal sponsor backbone outfits. So formally they're called consultants, and we show up and we ask questions and we connect people and we give people advice, and we hold one of the benefits of COVID, so to speak, we now have a monthly Zoom call where members of all 5 communities come, but we're not walking around in the communities with a sign saying, Wellville, we're here to help. We're here helping the people who are local, who are doing the work. If I walked around in Muskegon, nobody would trust my advice on vaccines, or that. We're not launching troops. We're the coach that stands by the pool or at the edge of the court, and it's the people on the court that win the game, that own the victory, that they're the active ones, and we want to help make them more effective, and we want to help them collaborate better. It's amazing how often we are introducing people in our communities, not just to people in the other communities, but to people within their own communities.
So you started this at the beginning of 2015? Is that?
The beginning, 2014 was, quote, the selection, and there was a wonderful event in Tampa where, long story short, we were kind of a subset of a bigger conference run by Oliver Wyman, and we had to get a second, smaller hotel because we kind of were a late add-on. And that was the hotel that Obama chose when he came to Tampa to look at some military facility or something. So he didn't quite join our meeting, but it was still pretty cool that he was in our hotel.
So you're about 7.5 years in to a 10-year project. What's the progress been like so far?
The progress has, first of all, we've learned a ton, including things to do, things not to do. We were much more focused on health and on metrics. The idea was 5 communities, 5 metrics, 5 years. And about 2 or 3 years in, it was clear we could commit to 10 years. We didn't want to, one of the most important things is never promise what you can't deliver. Anyway, so things have happened. Organizations have been set up. And I'm using the passive voice intentionally because it wasn't us. We were catalysts. We poked at things a little, gave people some visions, but they set up Hope Rising in Lake County, the diabetes prevention program in Muskegon. Another thing I'm really proud of in Muskegon is Goodwill, and the YMCA of all groups got together to take over a building and do childcare. And to me, that's a vector for some of this spreading, because of course our goal at the end of this phase is for other communities to say, we could do that too. They didn't get a ton of money from Mackenzie Scott or Mark Zuckerberg. They just up and did it. They found some funding for some things, but it came from the community, and it belongs to the community. So those are the kinds of things. Trying to think of, in Spartanburg, there's a program called Hello Family, which is a collection of local entities that were working on early childhood that are now working together. They did get a nice grant of $5 million from, again, not from one single donor that controls everything, but from Blue Meridian, from the city, from the health system. So what we're trying to do is not build a hierarchy as much as help the community weave its own fabric.
I know that Esther is eager to hear your questions. If you're in the room, you can fill out one of the question cards that's on that central table, and Excel Bugumo is going to collect them and hand them to me. If you're online, you can submit questions using the live chat function on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook. You can also email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. That's pthompson@stbarts.org. You're deliberately going about this in a way that's not kind of standard philanthropy. Can you talk a little more about what troubles you about the way standard philanthropy happens, and why you were so clear that you wanted to do this differently?
Yeah. So there's a wonderful podcast by a guy called Vu Le, VU space LE, nonprofit AF, and he's a troublemaker in a good way. So he's helped me articulate some of this, but fundamentally, you have large amounts of money, and fundraising for a nonprofit is sort of the same as fundraising for a for-profit. You talk to somebody who has a lot of power, and you tell them how brilliant they are, and you explain to them that your thing is what they should fund, and then they set all kinds of terms and conditions, especially in for-profit, they just want you to make money. In a nonprofit, they will often specify exactly what you have to do, and you can't spend any of the money on, for example, paying your people or whatever it is. You have to spend it exactly on this program and account for it. Oh, and by the way, in order to apply for this money, you have to follow our rules for writing the grant, and probably you should spend a few $1,000 to have somebody write this grant for you. So if you're going after a $50,000 grant, collectively, they may spend more than half of it just applying for it, and then one outfit wins and the others all lose. And there's a lot more. Just as a company, the worst fundraising pitch I ever got was from somebody who had an app for people post addiction rehab, and basically the business model was, we'll go to rehab clinics because people, we sort of assume they're going to relapse. So, the whole thing was built on capturing people back into the rehab system, which is stomach churning. But in many ways, philanthropies exist to serve a problem rather than to eliminate the problem. And it's not that people are thinking consciously, I want to make money, or I want this problem to keep existing so I can keep solving it. But at the same time, they're not going back to, well, how can I go further upstream and actually deal with the causes?
So the incentives are kind of wrong.
The incentives are even just the thinking. I need to deal with the results of this situation. Here are the troubled children. Well, what about the troubled parents? And we can't go back and fix their parents, but how can we help the parents be better parents rather than swoop in and replace the parents?
Can you talk a little bit about the role of local governments and public policy in these 5 communities, and what you've learned from them that might be applicable to government and policy in other places?
One advantage of having 5 is it's like you don't learn about fruit by looking at an apple. You learn, and so the roles and the contributions are different in each community. But if you're a poor community, and this usually is a result of, at some point there was some kind of industrial commercial base, and then in certain parts, there's redlining. Suddenly Muskegon Heights was created with no commerce within it, or in Spartanburg the textile industry and the furniture industry kind of collapsed, or whatever it is. So it's these communities end up with a low tax base. They don't have, the schools aren't as good. So local governments can be good, but they're short of resources, and nobody comes in and offers to help them. In Newark and in St. Louis and Chicago, and there's lots of big organizations with facilities, with trained people. There are people who've grown up. So, when I go to Muskegon and say, oh, hi, Esther, nice to see you. I once brought somebody from the Harvard School of Public Health, and I was, Harvard, here? And, that was funny and sad. people need respect, and they need a sense that they're honored. Anyway, back to what you really asked. So there's, the thing people don't realize is precisely these situations also create a lot of resilience. There's a lot of very smart, dedicated people working really hard, but the return on their efforts often is much less than it would be in a place like New York. And there's one I can talk about, Muskegon Family Care. The CEO was an embezzler. And it's one thing to steal from the rich, it's another to steal from, the care they provided was actually good. But anyway, she was finally taken away by the FBI.
Wow.
In handcuffs. And there's, so, even the authorities and HRSA, one way or another, somebody in HRSA must have known, because every year they filed reports that weren't quite legit. So you can't always rely on government to be, some people would say you can rarely, whatever.
And correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes local governments don't get the same level of scrutiny.
No, they don't, exactly. It's like, it's their problem. We don't want to mess with it, is sometimes the feeling you get. And when there are programs, these communities are not the place to get first crack at them. So, and yet at the same time, you have amazing local organizations of people who are providing. There's Pathfinders in Muskegon, for kids who can't get what they need from their parents, and there's police and basketball leagues and stuff like that. But it's unevenly distributed.
We have a number of great questions that have been submitted,
great.
And
And
I
one
encourage
up
you
there,
to keep submitting them. One question asks, how do you assess the need in each community, and how do you decide which experts and other help to bring in?
It's not really up to us. We sort of talk to people, and those who listen and want to hear more from us, we're exactly trying not to pick. We're trying to listen and respond. You have to go out and sort of say, here, I'm here to listen. You can't. But it's one thing we learned very forcefully is every community, in some sense, they all have the same needs. They've got diabetes, they've got drug abuse, they've got basic, probably schools that need more help, more child care, more maternal care. We can be most helpful by helping the ones who are successful becoming more successful, because when they're more successful, they're more willing to share, to collaborate, to, we're doing a training next week, and we have 2 empty slots. Would you, my competitor, so to speak, would you like to work? Come send one of your people. One of my favorite stories from Muskegon was the diabetes prevention program was part of a government grant given to Mercy Health, and Mercy selected the YMCA in Muskegon to be the delivery vehicle, which is unusual and wonderful, and credit to the YMCA. And we were talking about this and how to get referrals from Mercy, because it's one thing to have Mercy say, we'll work with you. It's another to get the doctors at Mercy to tell individual patients. And I said, you're going to need an API. And they asked, well, where do you hire one? And an API is an application programming interface. It's a bit of software that helps with the referral process. But actually, the joke was on me, because it still wasn't really working. And then they hired somebody from Mercy. So you had not just an application programming interface, but an appealing personal interaction between the woman who used to work at Mercy, Kelly DeLong, and her former colleagues. And then the referral flow started getting much stronger. So it's one way to foster collaboration is, in fact, to trade people and to work together. And it's less about committee meetings or the people in charge and more about the working connections that forms that fabric.
It's a very bottom-up model.
Yeah,
in general.
it's a community model. And again, that's why New York is a whole different matter. You need to find neighborhoods, and communities aren't as strong. But anyway, those are some of the things.
Someone wonders about your relationship with healthcare providers in these 5 communities. Do they welcome you? Are they resistant? What is that like?
It varies, as you can imagine. In Spartanburg, and partly it depends, again, on individuals. And another thing we're thinking about, as we've seen in the communities and as we move on, is succession. How do people pass this along to the next bunch of people? So Spartanburg Regional, very welcoming. Mercy Health, less so. Because they have right now other priorities, but they are a strong force in the community, and they're working with us more, I would say, than in the past. In California, the Sutter, so in Lake County, Adventist worked more with the Medicaid population, Sutter more with the commercial one. So Adventist was much more engaged, and they now have bought Blue Zones, and they're bringing Blue Zones into the community, and they're on the board of Hope Rising, which is the kind of the convening organization in Lake County. So it varies.
Someone says that they're from Niagara Falls, which I
yes,
know was
okay.
a community that was kind of initially selected,
Yes.
and then it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why it didn't work out with Niagara Falls?
Sure, and if they have an opinion, I'd welcome it. So it didn't work
They
out.
actually described this as that they were applied but not selected, but I know that it was selected initially.
Yeah, Niagara Falls was selected, and what a beautiful place. The organization was the mayor's task force for a healthier Niagara Falls, and we thought, oh, this is great. We've got the government totally behind us, and so forth and so on. But it turned out, I think as I mentioned, we talked about a contest, but in the end there was no prize, and I think they were hoping for a prize, and there was a fair amount of focus on real estate. Anyway, we kept going, and they wouldn't really return our calls or listen to our advice, and honestly, it felt like a situation where you're trying to break up with somebody, and you don't want to be a jerk, so you start behaving badly so that they will break up with you. Anyway, we finally said, look, we don't think we're providing any value here because we can't seem to get meetings with you. And we said thank you. And as I said, there were no contracts. Then the community of North Hartford tried to hire our CEO, who lives outside of Hartford. And we said, you can't have him, but you can become a Wellville, and he will be your person. So that's what happened.
That's how you got your fifth community.
Yeah, but Niagara, I wish Niagara Falls well, and again, there were some amazing people there, but some of it just didn't come together.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that's an important part of your model, that when it wasn't working out, you were able to say, we're going to go in a different direction.
Yeah, not abruptly, but yeah.
Yeah. Someone says that she's observed that in the federal funding model, there's a tendency to say, oh, it's worked, so let's do something else. How can we incentivize success in these initiatives?
That's up to you, the voters, and again, we're trying to show that a program that works is much better than one that's innovative. And there are things like nurse-family partnership, which have been shown over the years to give huge returns on the investment. And the returns you calculate include things like people not going, you have to look at counterfactuals, which is always hard when you're trying to make these cases, but how much money is not spent on care? How much money is not spent on incarceration? How much money is not spent on stipends or whatever for people who are not productive in the economy versus people are paying taxes, they're being productive and so forth. But there's also, what is the right thing to do? There's people's happiness. And it's not that this will guarantee happiness, but it reduces the amount of stress that helps to make people unhappy and make bad choices.
Someone wonders, what are the biggest surprises, good and bad, that you've had over these past 7 years?
So one is my understanding of addiction, which isn't a surprise, but more like a increased understanding. It's, in some ways, COVID was the worst surprise, certainly for the health of the people and the lives of the people in our communities. But it also, along with George Floyd and a whole bunch of things, focused much more attention on the inequities, the disparity in health and in health outcomes, just the vulnerable, all the things people don't die of, but suffer from. If you then get something like COVID, they actually make you die faster. And so it's that all these problems are made more visible and the disparities are made more visible. So it's easier to make the arguments about what the people in our communities are doing and how they deserve support in doing that.
Yeah, I can imagine COVID happening in the middle of this project shifted things.
Yeah, I mean, it shifted. So another positive thing is, for example, in Spartanburg, they would have these city council meetings, and now the attendance is much better. And the attendance is also not just people who have cars and childcare, but people can sit at home and join the Zoom call. Now, there are also people who do not have the digital access, and they're still left out. But in terms of actual attendance and engagement, they're getting more, which is really great. And I hope it doesn't end. And I don't know how large the audience is on YouTube, but I assume you're reaching more people too.
It's true. We've seen the same thing. People can actually be more engaged, even though there are fewer people in person than we had before. Right. In some ways, we have greater engagement. So what's the future of Wellville? You finish this in another 2.5 years, this phase of the project at least. What happens afterwards? And someone wonders, are you going to scale Wellville and have 15, 30, 50? We want the Wellville idea to scale with other people copying us, perhaps in their own communities. And so it will be slightly different because they will be local. We want other communities, again, to say, we can do that too. The whole notion of role models, it's not just an individual that looks like you. It's also someone and groups of people that give you the courage and the example and the inspiration to follow. And it's like, there's a wonderful joke. How could God create the world in 7 days? And it's because he didn't have anything to fix. He could start fresh. He's starting new.
Yeah, and so we're not creating communities out of whole cloth. We're working, and people live in communities that have problems. Nobody gets to start really fresh. But you can fix things. The challenge is to fix things that then reverberate goodness off into the future, or create the handhold so that people can climb further from where you started. So we want to influence communities, we want to influence voters, we want to influence policymakers and think tanks. And so we're thinking now, how do we find a couple of people who write books? And of course, we don't want them to write the books for us. It's a complicated thing. Writing a book is a real job, so they need to find a publisher. We're thinking of going to various sort of think tanks and finding fellows who would want to write about what we have learned and so forth at Wellville. Do more forums at churches.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I don't know how many discussions you've had at churches, probably few. Beforehand, we were talking, and you said that religious organizations are important in some of these 5 communities. Can you talk about the role that religious institutions can play in helping to cultivate equitable well-being?
Well, first of all, their goal is to their goal is to honor God and love God, but to create communities and help people support one another. Everything has good and bad instances, but their goal is to collect some money to support themselves and support the needy in the community. They believe in the long term. They believe in history and goodness and sharing and perspective and loving their neighbors. And that's what communities need. But again, I went to Benton Harbor, and there's a huge number of churches, but they were mostly like a basement church with 4 members. And again, getting even churches, and churches of different denominations and synagogues and temples, if they can collaborate where that makes sense, that's much better than all of them competing. And the good churches do that. St. Bart's is an example.
Well, churches, like other nonprofit organizations, everyone's trying to get their slice, and we have a hard time coming together and consolidating.
Right, and at the same time, so it's the people, the congregations, the people who marry someone from a different church and help bring people together, that helps. But fundamentally, a church is a local institution that brings people together.
And I'm struck you're at the kind of distinction between short-term and long-term, because you're absolutely right. Churches are in it for the long term. St. Bart's was founded in 1843. This building's been here since 1918. There are not that many institutions in this city outside of religious organizations. There definitely are them that have been around that long. And there are not many buildings in this area that have been around that long.
And you think about eternity.
We should.
Yeah, nobody does it all the time, but still, there's the fundamental principles are exactly what we're talking about.
But I think, and I've heard you talk about this in other places, the incentives right now in our public discourse are so much towards the short term.
Yes.
How do we reorient ourselves towards the long term?
Well, neurologically, when a baby's born, they need to feel a sense of security and trust, so that the marshmallow test where you gave a kid 1 marshmallow and said, just wait here for 15 minutes, we'll be back with 2 marshmallows, but don't eat that one. And I don't know, there's huge amounts of science that have come from that. There's also been refutations, but clearly this notion that I need to think about my long-term self. I need to go to bed early enough so I get up feeling good in the morning. If you grow up where, if I feel bad in the morning, I don't have a job anyway, so I might as well get drunk. These children need conditions where they feel faith in the future, and also they need a sense of agency for the future. In other words, I can do this, as opposed to, no matter what I do, nothing's going to change. And one of the things we're doing in Muskegon is a project using Oura rings to help kids, this is at Boys and Girls Club, understand their data and how their bodies work and how the metabolism of the food system works, that they're being they're being manipulated to eat stuff that isn't good for them and to buy things that they don't need, and to understand how to manipulate themselves instead. And so it's in the form of a scientific study with a doctor, quote, principal investigator running it. And the outcome measure is not, oh, did these kids sleep more or lose weight? And it's sort of sad how just the assumption is people want to lose weight. I mean, just, maybe they don't want to lose weight. Or maybe they weigh exactly what they want. But the point is for them to have a sense of agency and understand, this is how my body works, this is how I can control it. If I want to lose weight, I can. But what they don't need is more people bullying them to do stuff that they don't want to do. We want them to feel, make up your own mind, and then you can do what you want to do. Do you want to go to school and become a doctor? Do you want to go to trade school and become a plumber? Do you want to become a caregiver? But whatever it is you want to do, rather than have all these people all around you put you down, put you in a box, whatever.
I'm struck by the use of data. Can you talk a little bit about do we have too much of a thirst for data? Is data a really helpful tool, or is it both?
Data is a helpful tool. It can be distracting. It's, how shall I say, it's really important. And do you have data? Then we'll publish your study. Otherwise, forget it. Mm-hmm. And so you need both the data and the stories around them. You can, one thing I've learned, not just in Wellville, but in general, some people go down rabbit holes with data, and one of the questions in the IRB was you cannot do this with kids who have an eating disorder because it makes it worse. It has the possibility of making it worse. You can become obsessed with almost anything, unfortunately. And that's why you need people to think about the long term and their purpose, not just this sort of short-term addictive relief, whether it's with drugs or who knows, with data. Or, you hear stories all the time of people who won't go to bed until they've walked around the block 5 times so that they can get the right number on their little
steps,
thing. Yeah. And it's good to be active. It's not good to be obsessed.
You were a pioneer in tech and the internet, and since you're now working in this health and well-being area, what's the relationship between technology and our health? Is technology bad for our health, or good for it, or again, both?
It's like all these things. It's not the thing itself. It's your relationship with it. There were people who would flay themselves every morning because they thought the religion demanded it, and that was bad for them because the relationship with religion was abusive. There are people who, a lot of the whole eating disorder thing, your relationship with drugs or with, shopping or sex, or it's like almost anything can become an obsession. It's the obsession that's the problem, which is why. There are people who become a foot fetishist, is sort of a well-known term. It doesn't mean feet are inherently problematic. I would say alcohol and gambling and things like that are inherently problematic, and guns. But people can, it's the balance and the relationships that matter, not the thing. It's this that matters, not that. Whatever this is.
So we've come to the end of our time together. As a final question, I'm wondering, you're working on these, in some ways it's a small scale because they're small communities. On the other hand, you're working on the level of a community. On an individual level, what are your recommendations for how we can work towards more equitable well-being, both our own well-being, but also what can we do as individuals to help our communities flourish?
Yeah. One is ask good questions. It's amazing. You don't need to do a lot of work. You need to ask good questions of people doing the work. Then to the extent and one of the great inequities is, of course, the people with the most lived experience have the least time and money to put their own wisdom to work. So, that's a start. Don't try and fix the world's problems. Try and fix the problems where you can be most effective. Sometimes people say, well, why don't you go to Africa? They need you more. And, I'm not as useful in Africa. And honestly, I'm not as useful on the ground in Muskegon. Where I'm useful is at that sort of intermediate level where I'm helping the local people who have the local assets and the local connections and trust to be more effective. And then, again, helping to introduce them. So, just look at yourself and figure out, well, where can I be most useful? This is not a spreadsheet of where is there the most need. Where is there some need where I can be uniquely effective at responding to it? And, and don't be in a rush. Maybe you want to do something, especially if you're not looking for funding from a nonprofit, maybe you can do something that will last long term, which is there's an outfit that basically assigns mentors to, I think it's called Friends of the Children, and they make you sign an 8 or a 10-year contract that you will not abandon this child, because so many children, the worst problem is somebody's nice to them for a while and then for whatever reason they go away. And obviously you sign this contract, if if something happens in your life, you may have to, there are exceptions, but the fundamental idea is you're not going to be there for a year and then disappear. If you commit to something, stick around and see it through, or bring in a successor that you can not so much train, but kind of, again, gently make a transition to.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Esther, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you. That was great. And thank you all.
And thank you all for being here. We hope you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m. And something cool is that Esther's grandfather is was the English organist George Dyson, and we're singing a piece by him this morning. Our choir will be singing, so that will be a very special moment. So I hope you'll join us for worship at 11 a.m. I hope you'll also join us next week for the forum. We'll be welcoming our very own Patrick Berquist, who's the Director of Programs for Episcopal Charities. That's the arm of the Diocese of New York that works for people in need and to help achieve well-being in the greater New York area. He'll also be joined by the Reverend Zach Niane and David Sanders, who's the Program Manager for Crossroads Community Services here in residence at St. Bart's. So hope to see you then, and hope to see you at worship in just a few minutes.